Right. Welcome, everyone. This is another episode of Structural Reasons. I'm so happy to have Sourodip here with me, a world champion, world's adjudicator. We can talk a little bit about a bunch of stuff. It's gonna be spicy. It's gonna be fun. Stay tuned. Before I ask Sourodip my favorite question, as always, I would like to remind everyone, please subscribe because it seems like over 70% of you that are watching the channel are not subscribed. And every time that I see these numbers, it hurts my feelings. It's very sad for me. I work so hard. Now we've also have YouTube shorts and TikTok, and we are bumbling all around the social media. So please like and subscribe. That's pretty much all I'm gonna do as a content creator. If you want more begging, you can go watch Ruma's channel. I don't care. Cool. Suradip, welcome specifically. I'm very happy that we finally did this. We've been talking about it for quite some time. Um, and as always, my first question is, how do you feel?
Oh, I feel good. I think I talked to you about this channel the moment you started it. I think that's when we had this discussion. Um, and it feels good to be here. I think in between we've met. I think maybe once in Madrid, possibly if Madrid was after this, and then there was Vietnam Worlds, of course, which is super fun. So it feels good to be here, and it feels good to be talking to you again after a while.
Yeah, I think I created the channel after Madrid.
Hmm.
I think so, but we did see each other at Madrid and of course Vietnam. So that was pretty fun. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit more about you before we get to the debating part that everybody anticipates. I'm sure that we're gonna see some interesting, maybe hot takes, maybe not controversial. I know that some people have called you non-controversial, but you have the chance to prove them wrong today, which is good. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? Your childhood? What were your interests when you were before doing debating, or maybe outside of debating?
Well, so unlike a lot of other Bangladeshi debaters, I actually grew up not in Dhaka, which is the capital city. I grew up in Chattogram, otherwise known as Chittagong, which was named before it got changed because the British used to call it Chittagong. And that's where I grew up. And it's a place where we have like a different dialect. In fact, most debaters that come out of Chittagong actually apply for EFL quite legitimately because we have to run the local dialect first, then Mangla, and then English. And I did my primary school there and a bit of secondary school there. It was quite fun. It was a hilly city with a lot of trees. It's also near the beach. It was a super fun place to grow up in. It's also a very conservative place to grow up in. Like growing up, it was a very super conservative mindset that I grew up with because of that particular area. Even then, however, I think I attribute a lot of my progressive attitudes to my mom, who was a working female doctor and really always up with her professional work and stuff. So it was quite great to be able to follow her footsteps. I got specifically into, not, I wouldn't say specifically debating, but stuff like this because my dad always wanted to be a politician, but the only reason he couldn't be is because he has stage fright. So he was like, my son may not be a politician, but he will never have stage fright. So the first thing that I got into when I was in Chittagong was poetry recitation. That was the first extracurricular activity that I got into when I was in second grade. I was like, you go to poetry recitation. Why? Then you'll not have stage fright anymore. And I was like, oh, that is, yeah. I mean, as a second grade kid, what do you say to that? You don't say anything. You just go to the poetry recitation, right? And then I remember, I think when I was in like fifth grade, we had this thing in our school where we had this um, speech competition. And I remember specifically because I had lost my script for that day. So everyone walked up to the stage with a script. I went up without the script and somehow still won the prize. And the principal of the school was like, this kid is great. We need him in the debate team, which is all fine, right? Okay, a kid does good in speech, you put him in the debate team, that's all good. But one small problem was that the competition she was talking about is mostly for 11th and 12th graders and maybe for 9th and 10th graders, right? So that was like when I went into that competition and got absolutely thrashed, because you can imagine there is no way, no matter how intelligent a kid is, there's no way a fifth grader stands up to an 11th grader. Like POIs, I would be like, okay, moving on. That would be my response to a POI. And even still date, I would say one of my weaknesses is still POI. And I think maybe it stems from childhood. There's a possibility that that is true. Um, and from there onwards, like I actually didn't debate until 11th grade. Like it was that much of a gap because, like, you know, I got smashed when I was in the fifth grade. But then, like growing up, I think went into secondary school. I shifted. The family shifted to Dhaka. It was a bit difficult changing cities at that age as a teenager. Like since childhood, I've always been a big Man United fan. Because, well, as a kid was basically like there was satellite television, but obviously as a kid you don't know when the games are and everything. So I used to just open up satellite TV, ESPN goals, and there was this bearded guy who used to score a lot. And his name was Ruud van Nistelrooy, and like the Vodafone T-shirt, and that's when I became a Man United fan. And I've always played cricket, so I love cricket, which is not that familiar sport to a lot of Europeans, I understand. Um, so like, you know, growing up with cricket, football, poetry recitation, a bit of speech debating here and there. And then I think I went into Dhaka and picked up debating in 11th grade. I suppose from then onwards it's like debating questions. So I would say, like, non-debating wise, then I went into IBA Dhaka University, which is the best business school in the country. um, and as it goes, I am one of those people who have debated for multiple institutions, three to be specific. IBA, DU, then ANU, went there for my master's degree in international and development economics, then got into a job at the World Bank where I'm currently working, um, and also enrolled in BRAC for a master's that I wanted to complete, and I actually completed 25%. But then I was like, I don't really want to stay in the economics field anymore. I want to shift. So I'm going to shift going forward. And there are a few rumors about that. I can just say that the rumors are true. Um, and about to like pivot from a career in development economics in World Bank and then potentially to something else, hopefully. And yeah, that's pretty much in summary. Non-debate, a bit of debate.
Tell me a little bit about your work at the World Bank. What are you doing there? Is it an exciting place or more is a boring place? And it just sounds exciting. How would you describe it to people who are outside of that realm?
Honestly, my work is very easily describable to a debater because mostly debaters would understand these things. Because, as you know, we always have this debate: is the World Bank good? Are they good for the developing countries? Is the IMF good? Are they good for the developing countries? I cannot really speak about IMF, honestly. I mean, I can, but not from a professional perspective. But from the World Bank, like I work in social protection and jobs, which is essentially a portfolio of the World Bank that looks after like welfare programs in Bangladesh and like making welfare programs more modernized, streamlining welfare programs, creating structures within welfare programs. And two of the programs that I've worked in, one is the cash transfer modernization, which is essentially like, you know how like a lot of cash transfers happen to poor people, whether it be like widows, old people, pensioners, so many things, like just working to digitalize them, include them into like bank accounts as opposed to just going in and handing people money through an envelope, which obviously is prone to a lot of corruption. So like that is very, very simple to describe, but obviously the bureaucratic challenges in implementing that program is huge, and that's where you have to work um, with the client, which is the government. And then I also work in another cash transfer program, but this one is specifically towards like pregnant women and mothers of children aged 0 to 4. So they get a particular cash transfer, and then streamlining that, expanding that program because it's not in the full country yet. It just operates in specific parts of the country, expanding that. Again, very simple to describe, but the bureaucratic challenges are massive. In terms of like dealing with red tape, in terms of dealing with different stages of approval. It even has to go to the prime minister to get approved, right? So that's how high it goes, because these are like $300 million projects, $200 million projects. So these are huge projects and a huge loan that the country is taking from the World Bank. So yeah, I mean, things I guess debaters would love to hear: welfare. I don't know about some of like the right-wing capitalist debaters, but even Harish seemed pleased with it, so I would say maybe it's fine there as well.
I'm sure there are viewers from both camps here, so will be interesting. It's actually very interesting working with governments, especially at the large scale. Um, I, I want to know, is there like a common misconception that people have about this field and about working with governments or welfare in policy in particular, that a lot of people don't really understand, and you kind of figured out along the way?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I would say is, and this is something that I would honestly say is probably true now and may not have been true 10 years back, 20 years back, because there's a lot of literature indicating that it probably wasn't as true 10 years, 20 years back. But one of the things that I've seen, because this is an argument that debaters use again and again in these debates, which is essentially that when the World Bank comes in, the government doesn't have a lot of control. They don't have a lot of control over the policies they're implementing. They essentially like accept what the World Bank tells them, and they have to accept because they need the money. I would say that is, in a large part of it, is untrue. And the reasoning behind this is very simply the number of stages that it has to cross within the government, bureaucratically and work approval wise, is far greater than the number of steps it has to cross in the World Bank. This World Bank is a lot more streamlined, smoother process because of the corporate structure that it has. And the World Bank has a massive incentive to make sure that governments get that money, because we want to invest in these places. We want to make sure that we create an impact. And in those cases, obviously, the World Bank has certain ways of going about it, but the government has a lot of room to negotiate, to decide, to design. And it is pretty much like a discussion that happens. And at the end of the day, it is about convincing each other. Like, obviously, the government wants to convince the World Bank wants to convince the government. And just like any client, um, client and financier relationship, or a client and creditor relationship, this goes very similarly with when it comes to development here. So I would say that the one thing is the government does have a lot of control, say, freedom when it comes to these programs, and that is something that has been a bit of a myth.
That's actually something that, when I think about it, even from a purely debate perspective, it seems very logical. It's one of these things that I really like to use in rounds, where it's like, well, here's how it's actually probably gonna happen in the real world on the ground, and it's not so simple. Uh, and the incentives actually point in different directions. So that's here's a novel argument that you guys can use in those types of debates, I guess. You heard it from the source. Um, one other thing that I wanted to unpack from what you said, of your like personal summary. I really want to know more about cricket. Tell me about cricket.
Well, cricket is a very technical sport. Um, it has, it's 11v11 like football, but at the same time, no more than 13 people are in the field, because there are two people who are trying to score runs and 11 people who are trying to defend and stop those runs from happening and getting these people out. So essentially, like, for people who understand baseball, it's easier to explain, because like baseball also has runs, and you also have home runs and people getting out and all of that. The bowling team wants to essentially stop as many runs as possible, or get the people who are scoring runs out. And there are so many rules in that. Like, for example, the ball has to drop only once. When you are bowling, your arm cannot bend up to after a particular degree. Like, there's a degree up to which your arm can bend when you're bowling. That is the length to which like cricket is technical, right? And there is a crease. If your foot goes beyond the crease, there's a penalty. There's so many different ways of getting people out. Like, if someone gets to the crease later than an allotted time, they're out. um it's very chaotic. It's a very chaotic and technical sport, but once you get it, it's quite beautiful. I would say, honestly, cricket is more of an acquired taste than football is, because football is a universal sport. It's a universally loved sport. Like, most people in the world love it. And cricket is a lot more technical, has a lot more rules and regulations applied to it, kind of like baseball, but like at the end of the day, it's about scoring the most number of runs. um and yeah, that's all I can say about cricket, I guess.
But from what I've heard, it's actually pretty big, um, especially in Asia. Cricket. I think most people who wouldn't wouldn't really learn about cricket a lot or heard of it might have a misconception that it's a niche sport, but it's actually, from what I understand, it's pretty big. So I always it's very fascinating to me to see different games that are very big around the world in that capacity. Football, of course, is the biggest one. You are a Man United fan, which is unfortunate, but I'm not gonna get into that. I guess one thing that we can share in this case is you probably know who Dimitar Berbatov is. So you know one Bulgarian more in these particular cases. That's a lot of fun. So um, have your passion about football, cricket translated into debating in some way? Have you drawn comparisons from players who you've watched or teams or moments?
Um, yes, it has, and it has actually made me realize how debating is so much different than the sort of sports that we talk about. Because cricket, football, you can really do a lot of statistics in cricket and football. Debating is one of those monsters that cannot be tamed with statistics. Genuinely cannot be tamed with statistics. And I recently, it's been like what? It's been a month. I was in Singapore to watch Taylor Swift, and I hung out with Ashish quite a few times, and I was discussing it with him, and I was like, and then we actually came to the conclusion that it's very difficult to determine. For example, when it comes to football, if I tell you to name five goats, it's not that difficult. Like you can go like Messi, Ronaldo. Now some people would be like Pele, Maradona. Some people will be like, okay, fine, Zidane, Ronaldo, Fenomeno. Some people will be like, okay, Cruyff, Lothar Matthäus. So many options that are there. But at the end of the day, you can narrow it down to maybe 10 to 15 people that you can crystallize into those five people. Cricket as well, I can say the same, because cricket is even more statistical, so it's easier to crunch the numbers and be like which person was scoring more runs than the average batsman in that particular era. Debating, you just cannot. There's just no way. I genuinely think there's just no way to do that similar thing in debating. However, I can see that there are certain ways in which there are certain parallels that apply to debating. Like for example, if I say so, like in a lot of ways, someone who really is highly intelligent and contributing in prep time is often overlooked in debating because there's no way to find that out. And it's the same way, for example, why you would value David Beckham over Paul Scholes. But you cannot genuinely tell me that David Beckham had more of a role to play in United's 99 treble than Paul Scholes did. But David Beckham was obviously putting in the assists, the goals, the numbers were there. He was obviously more flashy and all of that. But if someone says that no, David Beckham's contribution was bigger than Paul Scholes, I'd be like, are you sure? Because it's very difficult to determine that. And it's very similar when it comes to debating. There are some people who are just great at that, and you would probably never know unless you probably had like in-depth discussions with people that they have debated with, like people like Tony Cruz, for example, or even Dimitar Berbatov, who had probably the greatest first touch ever. Like, right? Like one of the greatest people, like, like in terms of first touch, because it's very difficult to find someone with that silky a first touch. Um, and it's one of those things where you probably have someone who is so insanely good at that one small specific thing in debating, but probably overall probably wouldn't feature amongst the greats. Like it's very difficult to say that Berbatov is the best striker of his generation. That's probably not
Mhm.
true. But does he have the best first touch of his generation? That is probably true. Yeah,
So
stuff like that.
do some are there some names that you think of when we are discussing maybe it seems to me more underrated speakers that you wouldn't necessarily see how valuable they are to some teams? Can you think of some speakers like that?
Honestly, it's a bit difficult for me to say because like I don't really converse with a lot of people who are into this discussion. We just in debating, I've had this very like not that small but like somewhat group of friends who wouldn't discuss this in front of me. But I don't know how much Sajid is rated. I've always found him somewhat underrated as a debater. But again, I'm his teammate, so I've always been quite like biased in that sense. I found Sajid to be quite underrated. I found again another one of my teammate Amrit to be quite underrated. Because like again, like I don't know how much they're spoken about in debating going forward. Like from the olden days, for example, almost everyone talks about Shengu, right? I've always found JLM to be my inspiration, and therefore quite underrated. John Leader Maynard, um, if you remember, who's done 2 Worlds Finals from the back in the days, because like those are the speakers I used to watch when I was in high school. Um, People like Fiona Prose, for example. A lot of people talk about Viktor Finkel. My personal debating hero, one of my personal debating heroes, is Viktor Finkel. But Fiona Prose was absolutely phenomenal during that era. And this is like a very old era. And trust me, I'm not that old. I just have watched these people debate. That's it. I'm just a bit of a nerd who have watched these people debate. I am not that old. I am old, but I'm not that old.
Yeah, I've always thought about this part of it. I think even like the current generations, there's always a bit like even if I think about the Balkan ESL teams, like for example, I would say a lot of people know Milos. They don't really know that much about Janko, or they even a lot of people who, for example, have heard of MDG haven't don't really know who Stefan Sirizansky is when they spoke together, or with Tinen Lovro in that particular sense, or even to a certain extent, I think we've talked about it right now. I would say a lot of people know about Alec, but they're probably undervaluing Velina in many of these senses. So there is a lot of that goes into um, thinking of together of the cases, and um, throughout a journey that is especially a major like around 9 rounds and things like that, inevitably one person cannot carry it all unless they're like, I don't know, maybe if it's Shen Woolley, maybe Shen Woolley can totally destroy every topic,
But even not
but
Sheng Wu Li, right? I was talking about JLM. I was talking about John Leader Maynard as one of the underrated debaters who was Sheng Wu Li's teammate for the longest time. So even not Sheng Wu Li, not even Sheng Wu Li for that matter.
yeah, exactly, and because so many different stuff come out in debate competition. It might be like even random like pop culture topics, like, oh, this is not intellectual. No, it's part of the game. It's how the world works. These things matter. This is why we debate them, and they impact people's lives in a sense. I think debating has a bias sometimes towards intellectual topics, if that makes sense. Whereas in what we actually value in debating when we talk about these things is impacts towards people. And people are not only impacted by economic policies, but they're also impacted by messages, by narratives, by pop culture, by songs, by movies in these particular cases. So I've always found that very fascinating when I look at the debating community, especially BP, which is like university students. Many of them have are very like academia oriented. They're very focused, and I think like me and Rumen, from that perspective, since we don't really like studying in universities and things like that, as compared to the average Oxford debater, for example, have a different perspective on some of these motions and how they're debated. Uh, any thoughts on that?
Um, it's a bit of a. I have always subscribed to the philosophy that in order to be a better debater, you should work on your brain quite a lot. In the sense that even if it's something like playing chess, right? Like oftentimes debating can get monotonous. And this is something that Rumen and I agree with, because I've talked to Rumen about this. If you debate too much, at some point you get too fatigued and you start doing that. So take a break. If you love studying, then study. I guess I have not been the person who's studied a lot, but I've always gotten by. Like I've always gotten by pretty smoothly through my grades and all. I've never like risked failing. At the same time, I was never near the top of the class either. So you can guess from that standard. Um, and so I think, yes, obviously studying can help, but I've rarely found like course material be that useful for debating, honestly, unless you were doing like some literature review where you're reading a lot of academic papers. If you read 5, maybe one of them would be like, whoa, this is something that I might be able to use in debating. I've not found that transfer from academia or the academic knowledge that I've gotten to debating. Having said that, that's entirely up to like, a lot. Like for example, a lot of the things that I run in comes to like development economics debates and stuff like that have actually been more from news articles that like actual interviews of professionals, or like, so many nerds that I follow on YouTube and stuff like that, as opposed to like actual theoretical things that I've learned in my course. Like when I went into like, when I went into ANU to study my master's in development economics, at some point they were teaching us the resource curse. I was like, wait a minute, I think I've run that argument in one debate, but I probably didn't call it like resource curse, like how like if you have too much resources, it might be a bit of a problem, because there was a topic regarding this in ABP. And I was like, okay, there's a bit of an overlap as to what I've run. So oftentimes that has happened. Like I've done something in debating and then I've encountered it in academia. The reverse has also happened sometimes, but not as frequently. So obviously everyone has their own styles. I prefer more learning from like, I guess, nerds on YouTube, but that's just my style.
I would agree. I would agree, for sure. Uh, you mentioned this. You talked about it with Rumen, on like how much you debate maybe before a big competition and things like that. And from what I know from Rumen, you, before your last Worlds that you won, you didn't really do that many competitions. So was that intentional choice, or what did it go into this process for from that perspective?
So this has been a bit of a strange sort of situation. The worlds that I cared the most about, I think I did the worst in. The worlds that I cared the least about, I think I did the best in, at least in terms of knockouts performance, if not anything else. And this is a bit of a strange phenomenon, because what happened is Saeed and I were both like studying and working at the same time. So it was very difficult for us to balance things. Um, and then we did Cambridge IV and Oxford IV, which was in November. I think we did Australs in January. And after that, we've just been constantly working, and it's very difficult for us to debate in a competition that is in a different time zone. And at that point as well, I think the issue that I had was different from the issue that Sajid had. My issue was that I was working and studying at the same time, so it took up a lot of time. Sajid was also working and studying, but he didn't take as many courses. And I think, from what I remember correctly, Sajid was also breaking, like, it's a Brown thing, but he was also introducing his girlfriend to his parents, which honestly, like, it's very difficult to describe, but it is a big process. I hope Sajid doesn't mind me saying that. I think it's fine. They're married now. So I think that was happening. So we were like, it was very difficult. Right before Worlds was an opportunity, but here was the problem, right? It was Eid. So I had holidays. I'm Hindu, so I don't really observe Eid. Sajid has family obligations during Eid. Sajid was like, should we do a tournament? Maybe I can squeeze it in. And then I said, I think I've already planned a Thailand holiday with my friends, who are not debaters, by the way, not at all debaters. Um, and Sai was like, you know what? That's fine. Like, the prelims will be the prep, the knockouts will be the actual tournament. Literally, he said this, and I was like, that sounds about right. For that tournament. And as a consequence, what happened is, like, I am someone who actually prefers being at least somewhat derusted before a tournament. And I think the first three prelims was like was actually quite bad. Like, I think my average increase from day one after day two and day three is about 3 points or four, something like that. I forgot. I did that math. There was a 79 in day one. It was horrid. But I guess, do I regret it? I don't, because as it goes with time travel or any other instance, if we did not break, if we did not follow that pathway, if we did not break where we did, if we did not have the knockouts brackets that we did, would we have ended up in the final? Would we have ended up winning? Like, a lot of things matter. So, like, I don't regret it at all, but I can say that it definitely negatively did affect our preliminary rounds performance in Belgrade Worlds. I think we definitely underperformed, despite being in the top rooms in the last 3 rounds. I suppose we definitely did underperform because of that. Having said that, a flip story, Cape Town Worlds, super expensive. We spent a lot of money just going there. Like, it was a 23-hour journey, I think, from Dhaka to Cape Town, just like the entirety of it. We cared a lot about that tournament, Cape Town Worlds. And with all due respect, it had probably the worst judge pool of all the worlds that I've been to. And I've been to like all the worlds since Mexico Worlds, either as a debater or a judge. And And we were actually in form in a lot of those rounds, but like the things that happened in that worlds, I just like we cared so much, but like we did quarters in Mexico. I think we did overperform a bit in Mexico for our first worlds, to be fair. But then we expected better in Cape Town. We ended our run in the octos. We broke the worst position that we have ever broken. I think it was 20 something. I forgot. Um, and like overall, the performance in Cape Town was horrid. But that was the world that we cared about the most, if we speak about that from that perspective. Because like spending that much money, traveling that far, having already been the breakthrough team from Asia, the last worlds, there was a lot of expectation, not from others, but ourselves. Like we had a lot of expectations from us. So yeah, that's the worlds that like we cared the most. We practiced the most for. I was giving like speeches every day. We were practicing with so many people, even though online practicing wasn't available as much as possible locally. Still ended up not being the best of outcomes, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, it was still a fun worlds. We've had a lot of history broken. Like I think Zagreb made finals as the first ever ESL team to make finals in that worlds. So like to witness that was amazing. But yeah, that's just how our journey turned out. Doesn't necessarily mean that applies to a lot of people, but maybe it's a mental thing. Like caring too much leads to more pressure and therefore leads to worse performances. For some people, if it's more pressure, they probably perform better. Can be a lot of things. Yeah.
Well, I think usually we are the hardest ones on ourselves before anybody else. Especially, I think this is especially true for debaters, but I think in general, competitors. Most of the people who have done well competitively debating that I know, at certain points of their debate journey, have been very hard on themselves and have put a lot of pressure. I'm not sure that works for everybody. I think there is a point of breaking, and you need to be careful to not overdo it, as you yourself said. So what is that breaking point, and how do you manage it? I think one thing you've mentioned is obviously doing different stuff outside of debating. Did it help not your friends? Obviously, you have debate friends, but you also have, I assume, very close friends who are not debaters. Did that help?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like my best friend from it's been 11 years since 11th grade is not a debater, and my circle that is like me and my best friends and my extended circle there, um, not debaters. I hang out I think 50-50 with debaters, not debaters. Um, I guess that ratio might be distorted a bit now that I'm dating a debater. But other than that, I think that has pretty much been like probably even more towards non-debaters before that. Um, so I think that really helps. Also, like when I was in undergrad, I was also doing business competitions. I think Sajid was also doing business competitions as well, just like to diversify the portfolio and like having different things in the CV. I suppose sometimes you have to do that, but also overall, just like having different hobbies and interests and not doing debating. I think looking back at some of these years, I look back at it, and this is one of those things that is probably good in a way, but is also like to me, it's like where we overdoing it because I think you guys know, which is that in Europe, obviously you guys have Euros and Worlds, right? And that's it. We do 4 majors in Asia, and I've done I think 4 majors a couple of times. Like in the whole season, I've done 4 majors. That is a lot. That takes a lot out of you. um yeah, that is a lot. So that can be quite taxing. I'm not discouraging anyone from doing all 4 majors if you're from Asia. I think all of our great debaters going in the past, like if you talk about like the Amira, Mubarak, Jasmine, Mirza, all of them have done 4 majors and have achieved a lot of success in all of them. But at the same time, if you are someone who feels like doing 4 majors is going to be quite taxing for you, probably just have like limit the number of major tournaments that you're doing so that you can um, indulge in this activity in a bit more fun way. Also at the same time, keep tournaments where you don't have expectations for yourself. I think that is very important. I think sometimes I go into tournaments, I just don't have expectations for myself. I not now because I don't debate now, but like beforehand, sometimes I just go into a tournament like no expectations. um whatever happens happens. I remember there was this one open tournament in Bangladesh, which is no expectation, because I was speaking first all throughout all throughout that tournament. I was speaking first because um, my partner was a world's ESL champion from 2013, and he was always speaking second. So I was just speaking first, and I was like, no expectations for this tournament. Whatever happens, happens. Not a problem. And these are the tournaments, like, I genuinely enjoyed that tournament so much. I was just couldn't be bothered. And sometimes just give yourself that, like, go to that Oxford IV and do not take any pressure, I suppose, is what I'm saying. I mean, Niki would probably not support what I'm saying, but like, it replace Oxford IV with any other IV for that matter. Go to that, have no expectation for yourself, see how you go in debating. Just enjoy it for the sake of it once, and then see how it goes. It doesn't always have to be. Honestly, I hate losing, I love winning, but like, reserve that for some tournaments and just enjoy yourself in others.
No, I 100% agree. I would even say I'm a person who uh hates losing more than loves winning, if that makes sense. Um, but I have enjoyed a lot of these tournaments. That I didn't have any pressures on me. And some of these tournaments I've done very well. Some of these tournaments I've done very bad, and it goes both ways in certain situations. But I've been able to do different things, experiment. I've done, like, for example, a tournament where my main goal was to have very stylistic speeches and be like 100% style, and whatever happens happens with the rest of it, which resulted in some very cool speeches and some not so good speeches that were still fun to do. And this should be part of it. I Especially after I did Worlds and didn't want to be competitive anymore. That was um, something that was very fun to me. But I have to say, the best moments are when you are in it to win it, and you're 100% a win, and you put yourself against the wall, and you have to come out of that situation. Overcoming those moments is uh, is the best feeling, for sure.
No, I
Um,
agree with that. I agree with that. Yeah, that sounds about right. I've done that too, by the way. Like, going into a tournament, like first speaking, for example. Yeah, let's just first speaking. Let's just experiment. Some first speaking traits are useful when it comes to second speaking as well. So maybe that, yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, some of these tournaments as well. Like I'm pretty bad at first speeches, but I've like one of the few times that I actually did a tournament. Like one of those times I did very bad, was like pretty bad average. The other time I top spoke the competition. It was like last year Sophie Online Open, which was pretty competitive tournament, and I somehow top spoke it by doing only four speeches, which I think is just so funny, because I'm like literally the antidote to every four speaker that exists in the meta. uh, and the even funniest thing is that I did that competition with the idea to prove to myself that if I wanted to, I can speak like people in the meta do. So I didn't speak slow, and I had a lot of arguments and a lot of stuff, matter dumping in all of the speeches. And Fate smiled at me and says, "Haha, fuck you and your principles and your beliefs and ideas about debating. Here is a best speaker award for doing everything exactly the opposite way that you like to do it." Which I think is the one of the funniest moments in debating that they've always had. Um, what were your highlights throughout all of these particular debate journeys? Maybe let's firstly say, what's your highlight of a non-competitive um, competition that you did that wasn't that important, but you still ended up really enjoying it for some reason?
I think that one, the one that I was talking about, I would say, um, because I also somehow stopped spoke in that tournament, and like, it was an internal competition in Bangladesh. But at the end of the day, Sajid was also debating, and he was also first speaking as well. So I guess that still counts. And there were also a lot of people who've broken open at Worlds, ESL finals at Worlds, and like some people coming back from the past as well. And I really love that because it was like the reason I loved that so much was because it was a mix of debaters from different generations in Bangladesh. Because it hasn't been that long that we've put ourselves in the map. Like the first time Bangladesh broke open was 2015 at Worlds. So a member from that team was also debating. Um, and Sajid was debating with a World's ESL quarterfinalist, I think, um, and an ABP semifinalist from back in the day, like 2015, 2014, that era. Um, so like it was a lot of generations of Bangladeshi debaters coming together and kind of having like fun in every round, because it was also a round robin tournament, so everyone was facing everyone. It was not power pairing, so it was a round robin tournament and everyone was facing everyone. It was just super fun. The Yeah, just, and I would just like to say, like, I don't know if you find it, but like extension speaking is super fun. Like, I don't
Yeah,
really enjoy PMLO that much, but extension speaking is super fun.
it could be, especially if it's your emotion. Because
Yeah.
sometimes as a second speaker, sometimes it's your emotion, but you still have to, you have to, yeah, exactly. For the people just listening, yeah, you have to give it away. You have to give the goods away, and sometimes something is left for you. But they they get the better speaks, but you know.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Paul Scholes, that long ball up from the deep, and the striker finishes it. Everyone's like, "Oh, the striker scored the goal." But have you seen that long ball? No, you didn't, right? Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like this is what I joke about with Rumen and the 90. I was like, okay, guys, I like Rumen, absolutely great at that debate, but I was in that prep time. I was in that debate. I also got an 89. Like it's not like Roman just straight up stood up and completely obliterated the debate round, and I was just chilling in the background. It's a two-person game. So I think these are very cool moments when you get to have your emotion, and on the competitive, it's very frustrating when it's your motion, but it's definitely not your partner's motion, but they have to speak first, you know? Those
Oh,
are
that has happened. That has happened. That has happened.
those are very, very fun. And they're like they're saying some stuff and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna fix this. I think for me this was the at Madrid Worlds around 9, which was like the intellectual property motion, and I've worked in intellectual property for some time, and like women is totally out of this world. So our speeches were super different, um, as like strategy and what we did, but it was very fun in that sense. So let's go to the worlds. Um, your first worlds, was it 2018
Yeah,
or
Mexico World.
Mexico Worlds. So, tell me a little bit more about Mexico Worlds, and then we'll get to that quarter that I have to ask about. You know,
I have
what,
I have
what?
some very nice anecdotes from that quarters as well. But Mexico Worlds was one of those tournaments where we went in. It was especially a bit personal for me, and the reason being behind that is, so I said that we did quarters, but what people don't know is 3 months before that I did not break at ABP. Um, and I can say this about ABP because like I've been a part of Asia and I love Asia debating. I hold Asia debating in my heart, but way too many teams break in ABP as a percentage of the total teams. Like, I'm not afraid to say this in ABP Council as well. Way too many teams break, and I think we need to streamline that. We need to lessen the number of teams breaking in ABP to make it more competitive, so that our teams can then go forward and do better at worlds and stuff like that. But that's a different discussion. Like, the reason I'm pointing it out is because, like, at least when you're debating at that elite level, breaking at a major shouldn't be that difficult, especially when it's a major like ABP where there is the breaking percentage is higher, right? It's higher
Mhm.
than a lot of other majors that exist around the world. um And I did not break at ABP. I think reserve break 2 at ABP and did not break due to speaks. And that hurt quite a lot. And going to Mexico as well was quite difficult. We didn't have a Mexican embassy. We had to go to Singapore for a tournament. We stayed at the friend's dorm, got the Mexico visa from Singapore, and then had to get a transit visa for Canada because we were transiting through Canada, which we later realized we didn't even need because it wasn't a transit. It was a fueling stop in Canada. And like going to Mexico was a 44-hour flight. Like not a 44-hour journey, not a 44-hour flight, sorry. Like it was like, Dhaka to Guangzhou 18-hour layover, then 16 hour, like 12 hours to Vancouver, 1 hour fueling stop, and after that I think 6.5 hours to Mexico City. All of that added, it was like something around 44 hours or something. And like that world, Sajid and I, there was this one day I heard this noise at 6:30 a.m. I was like, Sajid, are you up? Sajid's like, yeah. I was like, I've been up the whole night. I was like, I have been too. It's because it's a 12-hour flip, right, in terms of the time zone, and we just couldn't sleep during the prelims. And it was quite like, we went there, honestly, we were like, we would love to break open, but we at least want an ESL break, which is more realistic, because that was the first Worlds, we had no idea. And then once we got into debating, and when we were debating, I think Mifzal judged us one of the rounds initially, and then Emma Johnston, who won Worlds, I think in 2017, Dutch Worlds, was judging us one round, and Emma was super impressed and let us know. That was a massive confidence booster. Small moments that matter, like a world champion coming up to you and be like, you guys did great. I was like, well, if it's good for you, it's good for us. And then we had Ashish in round 7, and then Ashish again in round 9. And then in round 7, we entered day 3 with 12 points. And we realized that we had won because we went into a room and it was like, I don't know if you guys remember Steph White from Sydney, but she was absolutely phenomenal. And there was Chin and Jason in that room in round 8. We were like, what the hell are we doing here? Like, genuinely, what the hell are we doing here? And I remember we had some extensions. We walked into the room, right? We had some extensions. Steph White speaks for 3 minutes. I have seen Sajid cut out literally all the letters in his 2-page prep. All the letters were cut out because Steph White had covered everything in 3 minutes. I kid you not. I was like, oh, this is going to be a rough round. We somehow pulled through a third. I still don't know how. We somehow pulled through a third. And then in round 9, we had a phenomenal debate. I think it was one of those rounds. Like when you were talking about the whole, like, the 90-89 thing, it kind of reminded me of that round because Sajid had gotten an 86 and I got an 85. But honestly, like in case construction, I was like, I got this. It was a very, and we had Ashish again in that round. And we entered round 9 with 16 points. We knew that we were like, we did the math. We were like, we probably are in 16 points because like when you go to that room, you're either on 15 or 16 points. Like when you're in the third top room and they're streaming your round and stuff like that. So we knew that if we won, breaking open was sure. If we got a second, high probability of breaking open. Third or fourth might be a bit contentious. Looking back, third would have been enough for an open. Fourth would have definitely been an ESL. But as it goes, and before it was fashionable, our favorite position was OO, and we did get OO. And we smashed that round, and we broke, I think, 17th, which was absolutely wild. Like the reactions from the Bangladeshi debating community at that point. And I genuinely say that is the happiest moment in my life in terms of like debating. In my debate life, that is genuinely the happiest moment because you just like, you go in there, you're like expecting to, if I break ESL, I would be super happy, and then you break 17th. It's a joy that cannot be. It is very difficult to express that because someone was live streaming. One of our seniors from debating was live streaming because we were like 3 or 4 Bangladeshis there. It was debate. He was live streaming, and the comments we were going through the comments later on. The comments just kept pouring in. They were like, "Oh my god, this is absolutely crazy!" Because the only time before that, no, there were 2 times. 2 times before that, Bangladesh had broken open. It was 42nd and 43rd. So from that to going 17th was a massive shift, and it was not just for Bangladesh. I think Asian teams, we were the topmost breaking Asian team from there. Even though obviously before that Mifzal had set the bar quite high. I think Mifzal and Jasmine, Mif and Jasmine from UT Mara, they broke second. Jasmine and Mif definitely set the standard then. And but for that year, 17th was the highest from Asia, so there was that as well. And then getting into PDO as the top seeded team in PDOs, given that PDO start from 17. PDOs was not that much difficult. Octos, on the other hand, was super difficult. And the reasoning behind this, especially for me, because imagine you're going into your first worlds, you're in your Octos. The speaker before you is Dan Lahav, is a bit challenging to say the least. Um, there were two very good teams from, I think, if I remember correctly, Australia and Ireland in our top half. And then CG was Dan and I all, and CO was Sajid and I. And Dan was obviously speaking whip, and I was speaking op whip. And we after doing that debate, we were like, oh, this is super close. Tel Aviv A is through for sure. But like it's contentious between us and one other team in the top half. And I asked Dan about it because obviously that's what you do. Like if you have Dan in there, you go and ask Dan. And I was like, I didn't really buy your positive extensions, but you guys do excellent responses, like excellent rebuttals. And we were like, wait a minute, most of our rebuttals were to you guys. So that's probably one of the biggest compliment I've ever gotten in debating. That was just our at that particular time. And then on a 3-2 split, we went through, whereas I think it was 3-2 against us at the beginning, but the two was Ashish and Emma, who had already seen us in prelims. And then in this debate, because it was a bit contentious, and then Ashish and Emma were able to flip one judge. And I think it was one of those deliberations that took a bit long while, like the kind of the thing that has been branded as like the Techway deliberation, which also then turned into, ironically, the Matt Kaito chair deliberation recently. So I'm just like yeah, that kind of deliberation. Like it took, like literally our room was the one that was holding up announcements in that round. And then we walked into the quarters, which was us, obviously Tel Aviv A, Oxford B, that was Chin and Jason, and Princeton A, who made finals that year. Yeah.
So let's unpack this quarter. Um, the motion is on antisocial personality disorder. I
Yep.
looked it up before this, so it's I think I have it here as well. So it's this house as a parent of a child with antisocial personality disorder would enable and support that child given that child's aims based on their current psychological makeup instead of trying to make them more empathetic. So this is the motion, and so do you remember the positions? Who was in which position? I can look that up as well, though.
No, absolutely. I remember the debate. I remember the entire debate. Like we were in opening government. Opening opposition was Princeton, who absolutely smashed us in the top half. CG was Chiran Jason, and CO was Tel Aviv. And even in the panel, I can name two people, Ashish and James Dieter. I forgot the rest of the panel, but yes.
Yeah, it's a stacked room. So what happened there? Obviously, like the bigger story is, oh my gosh, the first breaking team, Dan Lachaf and Ayao, knocked out at quarters. So what's happening here? There's gonna be similar to this year's, I think, quarter in that room. There's gonna be a lot of opinions based on um, perceptions of people. So what actually happened?
Okay, so I'm just gonna give you an overview of the debate. I think you'll get what's going on in that. I think it was a bit of a shame that it wasn't recorded, but it was because it was a great debate. And I remember the room was absolutely packed, to the extent to which there was probably someone like very near me just sitting behind our desk. It was absolutely packed to, and presumably a lot of people were there watching Tel Aviv A, because of course, like a team that has ranked one and has gotten 25 points. And if I'm being absolutely honest, given our first worlds, we were a bit out of depth in that room, and we absolutely forfeited that round. And I have no qualms, admitting that, because we did overperform a bit. We were probably, giving full credit to ourselves, we were probably an Octos team who pushed forward further and went into quarters in that tournament. But I honestly, full credits, because we kept it calm under pressure. But in that quarters, I wish I had somehow magically watched young Sheldon before I had gone into that quarters, because I would have been far better in that. Because when we got this motion, we were like, what? And it took a while. Like when you do that, it takes a while to figure that out from that, right? And we were just like, it was a bit it was a bit difficult emotion for us, and we could see Princeton absolutely hammering us because we didn't get to the crux of the debate. And then we had a few things, and I also remember at that point in time I made a lot of jokes about Tel Aviv A in that debate before they even spoke, and it was hilarious. Probably the funniest speech I've ever given. One of the worst speeches maybe, but it was supremely funny. I literally went up and said, imagine one of Dan or Ayal has this disorder. And Princeton is saying that you wouldn't want to socialize with that kid, but would you not want to socialize with the top breaking team? Because at the end of the day, that's what people socialize on the basis of, like, reputation and stuff like that. And it was hilarious. Like, everyone was laughing. I think Dan or Ayal, one of them gave me a look. Other than that, everyone was laughing. And then Chin and Jason actually did the actual Gov case, which was essentially that, you know what, they made like one argument. They took one argument on, I think if I remember correctly, was about the mental health of the child and analyzed it to the full extent possible. Looking back at it, supremely annoying that we missed out on analyzing that argument to the fullest extent, and a bit stupid as well. But having said that, like, under pressure, that room, it's very difficult to, like, obviously now it's very easy for me to say we would have run that, but in that situation, you don't know what would have happened. Interesting enough, after Ayal spoke, I thought this is looking like a short cross. I told Sajid this is looking like a short cross because regardless, at that time I was such a huge nerd that, like, if I wasn't debating in that quarters, I would have been watching that quarters. So I was in that position. I was like tracking it on my head. I wasn't taking notes. I was like, Sajid, this genuinely looks like short cross. And then we have a discussion with ourselves, just very quietly. And we realize, obviously, like, you can't say that before Dan speaks because it's Dan, right? There's no way you can say that before Dan speaks because it's Dan. And then I think Chin does a great job of rebutting CO. So they're in more trouble now. First of all, their case isn't as great. And like, we don't think the merit of the case breaks into the top half of the debate. And then Chin speaks, and it's even they're in even more trouble because O is looking like the better op team at that point. Dan gets up for 1.5 minutes. I think, if I remember correctly, attempts to frame out closing government. I would say unsuccessful. And then says that the main arguments in the government bench came from opening government. I was like this at that point. I looked up. I was like, oh my God, they have lost the plot. They have lost the plot. Because I know I am fourth. How do you not know I am fourth? Like, you're Dan. You should know that we are fourth. Stop wasting time engaging us for 2 to 3 minutes. Try to deal with the other two teams. They are your biggest threats. How have you not realized this? And yeah, after that is pretty much them getting knocked out. We get a fourth, they get a third. Very deserved. The call was absolutely right. You couldn't have gotten a better panel. Even today, if I want to debate a high stakes debate, you give me that panel, I'm taking that panel. It's a great panel. Yeah, the call was absolutely right. And yeah, that was my take. I was just like, I was genuinely astonished when Dan was like, I'm going to spend 2 to 3 minutes on opening government. I was like, no, Dan, this is probably one of the worst mistakes of your debating career that and given how much I follow, respect Dan, that was also slightly painful for me to watch because I was wanting them to go through. Because obviously you'd want the only other ESL team. Probably, I think at that time, IIUM A was also the other ESL team that was in the quarters bracket. It was just us, Tel Aviv A, and IIUM A. No other ESL team had made it to quarters. The scenario right now is so different. But at that time, it was just 3 teams. And obviously, we know that we are not going through the moment Jason spoke in CG. Remember, we were like, yeah, O has beaten us, CG has beaten us, we're out. We're gone. At that point, we're like, okay, let's hope that, CO makes it through. But yeah, that was painful.
No, I understand completely. I think what's interesting in these camaraderies between ESL teams is exactly the situations where um, you might have to face each other and you might have to knock out each other, and that's kind of tough. I think mentally, you have to. I think you have to be prepared before the tournament that these situations are going to happen, especially if you are in a situation where you have very competitive people from your own country or institution that you are very close with. This is something that I think the Bulgarians experienced, especially at Euros, but me and Roman experienced at Worlds as well. where like we have in Noctus and in Quartus we have Bisa and Maria. They're basically with us in the whole bracket. So uh, we know that at certain point we'll have to make the decision, especially if you're closing, that we have to decide, okay, are we knocking them out or are we trying to knock out the other team? And it's a tough one, and this is why we had the conversation beforehand, and I told them to have the same mentality for Euros when we were still two Bulgarian teams that were clashing, and they inevitably clashed. um, you have to be prepared to kill them on the spot. No mercy, no mercy. That's the only way to do it, because otherwise you are, it's not fair. And I think this is what this is how we did it from our perspective. But it's always some level of sour taste, because if only, we could have gone to semis and to finals together, because we're in the same bracket, and just continue knocking teams out. But that's life. The other conclusion that I think is interesting is exactly what you said. Seems now that you give the context, this call is very right, and even though it's a call that nobody would necessarily expect, also like I think back at that point, Jason and Lichin are not Jason and Lichin as we know them today. So they don't, like, they are Oxford B, Oxford preppy team, but still nowhere as preppy as reppy as Dan and Ayao. But that shit happens, and to me, people need to realize that that's part of the game, and it's probably something that goes back to what you were saying on how unpredictable this game can be as compared even to sports to a certain extent, because um, I guess for me it's really the human element. So many things can go either way. What would you say? Is it really the human element, or is it something else? And what do you see as the human element that makes this game so unpredictable?
Oh, it is definitely the human element. Like, at the end of the day, I think we've spoken about this as well, which is essentially that this is a game of persuasion. We are not here to explain it logically to an AI, that we're winning the debate, and like we literally like weighed up like every word by word and everything. At the end of the day, this is about persuasiveness, and that's why when it comes to persuasiveness, you some judges can be a bit of a black box. Like, you don't know what they will buy the most, um and like at that point in time, you sort of kind of try to cater to that, um and that is what makes this game so very unpredictable, in that sense that you don't know what this judge is going to end up buying. And that's why, like, the probability of, say, Crystal Palace beating Man City right now is definitely way lower than the probability of, say, the 24th or 25th breaking team breaking and like beating the first breaking team at Worlds. Like, if I would draw a parallel, because, and it's not necessarily due to always bad judging or like random judging or whatever. It is just that on that particular debate, this person was more persuasive. I think I can give you one famous example. I don't know if any Dino has given you yet, which is essentially that this is something that I've heard from my seniors, which was at Worlds 2013, which was known for completely different things. Worlds Chennai was known for very, very different things. But if you look at the debating side of it, um, Emma, Emma and Chris was the Sydney team that had gotten, like, uh, uh, 26 points. And that Sydney team was like absolutely destroying everybody. Only one team took 1 point off of them, and that's still the highest in Worlds. Nobody has done 27 points yet. Like, only 26 is the record. They made it to the finals. That finals was theirs to win. The topic comes up. There's a Harvard team in that debate who's doing a PhD thesis on that topic. How bad can your luck be at that point? What do you do at that point? You are the best debating team in the world by some distance, but you're not the world champion, because that's what happened at that debate, and the Harvard team won. because they were doing a PhD thesis on that very topic. It is very difficult to beat them at that point. So that 20th breaking team or whatever may have done something or read something or studied something on that topic that the top breaking team just cannot make a way around. And you know what? If they debated 10 times, 8 out of 10 times the top breaking team would probably beat them. But this is one of those 2 out of 10 times, and there's nothing to do about it. And legitimately so. I'm not saying like bad judging or whatever. Legitimately, this team would beat the other team. And that's how it
Yeah.
goes.
No, absolutely, and that's why I think the sheer accomplishment of getting to a finals in itself is very meaningful, because it is a huge difference between being good enough so that even when you're put in a very bad position, you can still take the second and continue to the next round. I think this is where you can show off a lot of skill, and you can like bridge the gap between you don't know shit about this motion. It's a tough room, tough position. You're not feeling well, but you still break through these things and manage to get the second. But we know that sometimes it's just impossible to get that first, in some of these situations. And this makes it so you can appreciate a lot more of people who, I would even say, like finals, but in general, who have showed systematically that they are performing well over a bigger period of time, rounds, um, and things like that. On that note, Ashish said something very interesting in the last episode. He compared the fact that a lot of sports throughout time, I think cricket, as you said, is a good example, have continuously become more technical and more technical, trying to maximize every simple thing that you can do better and better to achieve better results. Has this happened to debating, and has it happened to a problematic state? How do you see the current meta versus what you experienced and what you saw before you?
I think it definitely has. I'll talk about two things in specific in this particular area, and I've also talked to Ashish about this as well, which is essentially that the first thing is um, people do not get credited enough for novel extensions anymore, because the judge simply asks, "Oh, what's the probability that this would happen?" And it's very difficult to sometimes prove that the probabilistic chance of this thing happening on like more than whatever your opening has run, because obviously opening has run the more intuitive argument, is a bit difficult. However, I think sometimes obviously the closing teams can do it better as well, but the judges should also realize that sometimes just because something is less likely to happen doesn't necessarily mean that the impacts of it are not far reaching and therefore cannot be credited. Like for example, like if I give a very plain example of this, which is essentially that if if you wanted to build a school beside a nuclear power plant, I think 99 out of 100 times nothing would happen. The nuclear power plant is actually quite well run. Most nuclear power plants in the world are very well built. Nothing problematic about them happening. Nuclear disasters have gone down in numbers in the last decade or so. Would you still do it though? I think most people would say that no, you wouldn't. The the average intelligent person would be like, what on earth are you talking about? Like a school beside a nuclear power plant. But if you think about it from a purely like absolutely reasoned probabilistic sense, yeah, that makes sense. Like if you can like teach the kids around that school, probably a benefit in that sense. Like people around that area, probably poor, gets education, whatever. um that I'm just giving an illustration or an example, but like generally speaking, that is the reason why teams fear to run novel extensions anymore. Like even in this world, I've seen that teams, whenever, even when they attempt to do run novel extensions and I want to credit them, they just drop the ball because they just don't know how to do it. The same team, top half, oh my god, phenomenal, 83s, 84s. Like, what's happening? Why are they not being able to run after a team has comprehensively done everything in the top half? then why are you not being able to run novel extensions? And that is what happened. For example, if you remember the Mexico Octos that I was talking about, the EPL teams in the top half had run everything. Dan and I all came up with a super novel extension, given their experience. It was by the way, it was like a, I think if I remember correctly, it was a war related, judgment related kind of motion. I forgot exactly, but the themes were war, legal, and everything, and like obviously victims of war crimes and stuff like that. So they ran an extension. We were like, whoa, this is super new, this is novel. And we also had to run an extension because we were forced to, and we both the teams went through. And I can genuinely say, if you put up a lot of panels from the modern day, they would have probably voted top half, despite that panel having Ashish and Emma in that room. By the way, I just remember it was Eleanor Jones that was from Chris, like in the Sydney. Eleanor Jones and Chris Bissett. Those were the two people. Sometimes I get confused with names. Anyways, sidetrack. That panel was great, and they decided that the teams in the bottom half progress. But I can see in the modern days that the top half would progress from that room, and that is a bit of a problem. That's the first thing. I think the second thing, that this is a personal distaste. This is not, I think this, like, a lot of people may disagree with. I do not like the overuse of commentary without substance. Commentary with substance is great. Commentary without substance, I hate it. It's just a bit of a pet peeve. Like, oh, they have not analyzed this argument. But have you shown me that you have? Can you please show me why you have, on the counterfactual, done anything of that regard? I understand they have not. I am smart enough to figure that out in most cases. You can tell me that, but there's no value in that unless you do the flip. Or they have not analyzed their argument. But have you? Can you focus more on that, please? And it seems like debaters learn commentary first, and then things like analysis and impacting second. Whereas in our time, it was completely different. We used to have to learn analysis, impacting first, and then commentary was this, like, oh, framing. This is advanced commentary. This is advanced. This is something like that is difficult to pull off. Like the best debaters in the world were doing that, but they were obviously backing it up with a lot of substance. They were not doing commentary for commentary's sake. Commentary for commentary's sake is a horrible trend in debating today, and I absolutely hate it. So if I'm ever judging you next and you're listening to this, thank you for listening, and please don't do that. Do commentary by all means, but have substance backing up with it. So these are the two things that I find is a bit difficult. But yes, answering the question that Ashish put forward, which is essentially that yes, debating has become a bit technical, and the impact of this is that, like, the death of novel extensions. Because if you're trying to be too technical, it's very difficult to be novel, because novel ideas are a bit out of the box. Out of the box ideas are slightly harder to prove and slightly harder to persuade. And if you're being super technical, you'd be like, what's the point in running this? I would not be able to prove this. But you need to know how to prove this. You need to know how to make it persuasive, despite it being a low probabilistic claim. You have to be like, hey, even if there's a 10% chance that this happens, the impact is so big that the risk is not worth it, right? Like, obviously the argument will be phrased whatever way it's phrased in the context of the debate. But if you can do that, pull that off, and essentially break through, I think you can be one of those teams who's setting this trend and moving the needle forward. Because being technical is all great. Putting emphasis on things like, oh, is this being analyzed to the fullest extent? Is this impacting done well? Is this weighing done well? All great. But sometimes you also have to remember that some arguments do not need as much explicit weighing. The merit of the argument is enough. So if you're focusing too much on the technical stuff, you will credit more technical but less merited arguments over, like, over more merited arguments that are less technical. And that essentially values technique more than the idea, the strength of the idea, the strength of the case, and stuff like that. So that might be a problematic trend that's going forward, that is a result of being more technical overall. So yeah, that would be my commentary on this.
And I have to say, looking back, the moments now that I've achieved what I achieved, the moments that I cherish the most are those debates where I was able to do something out of the box in analysis, in cases that I've run. These are the highlights. I never look back to all this even like to be more precise with that words, the 89, 90 speaks a debate, regardless of whether you think these points are fair or not. We did very well in that round for obvious reasons, and I still don't think of it as like the highlights of how I felt about it looking back to it, because it's just a fact that we were really good. We checked all of the boxes, we went the extra mile, we had the persuasion of those things, so it was very good. But I liked much more the round after that, where we had much lower speaks, in fact the lowest speaks for the day, which were still pretty good, but that's not the point. And I loved it because of the case that we ran, and the case that was we were in the same position. We had Ateneo in opening, and they took everything. So the only way we knew from moment one, the only way that we can win this round is by doing something different, something novel, and that requires a different approach to debating. So here's my take on why this has happened, because I think this is an interesting point. I think a big reason for that is the online era of debating. I think persuasion as a skill is very hard to use in an online setting. I think, I mean, obviously, like, I don't know, if I think of like one of the most persuasive debaters, like for example Hamza, is still Hamza even online, but it's not the same. And I think maybe you would disagree, but it's so different when you're in that room, when you're using the crowd. You make the joke because you know there's going to be a response, and you feed from the response to a certain extent. All of these things are completely lost in the online medium. And when you cannot even practice that skill, and if that skill cannot be rewarded, even if people want to reward it, it's going to be much harder. That leads to, when you're put into these situations, even if you run something novel, because you're not so good or experienced at being persuasive, you cannot get away, and you know you cannot get away with more novel arguments. So the meta of things shifts. Whereas if you are put in situations 3 or 4 times down the line, as me and Roman were back at Euros, before that Worlds, back at the Worlds, back at some competitions in person before that, we know we've been in these situations. We know what we need to do. We know that we cannot run the obvious stuff. It's not going to work. So from the get-go, we are completely focused on, it's gonna be novel, and it's gonna be hell of a job to persuade. So we need to spend 15 minutes in prep time and all of the other time in the debate to figure out how to make this sound persuasive, and make the right comparison, choose the right words to mold it into what it can be, and essentially create a new baby argument that can be with the other arguments, if that makes sense. So this is my thoughts. Um, what do you think about this being the reason, and will it change back to more persuasiveness in the future?
I think that is definitely a possibility, in the sense that, because I remember in the, because honestly, like, obviously a lot of my big achievements are during the online era, but a lot of my debating career was in the non-online era. I'm pretty much a product of the non-online era, and like, all of those times, like, Mexico Worlds, whatever, and like I've done 3 worlds that were offline, and I think that you are right in the sense that persuasion does become slightly less important when it comes to online, because it's more about, oh, are they, the judges tracking everything and writing everything down, and as an output you get more technical version of debating in that sense. um and as an output that becomes quite the thing, but at the same time, like, persuasion being the most important thing is also, can also be somewhat bad, in the sense that you need a bit of a balance. For example, obviously there's an O streak going on, and before there was an O streak going on at Worlds, there was an OG streak going on, where it was essentially all you needed was a PM speech that was super like, status quo is horrible, we need this change, and yep, you've won Worlds. And that, because you get to say the first word and because you get to be the most persuasive, um and going on from like, invade Zimbabwe, support nationalism, and then like, free trade in 2013, and I think there was a streak there. I think even I think test worlds as well, opening government, Dutch worlds as well, opening government. So just such a streak of opening government winning, um that in a way sort of um does sort of like, that persuasion era also has its pitfalls, and right now we have its pitfalls. So as a debating community, I suppose we can strive towards bringing it more to a balance of, yeah, we need to be wary of how this debating is going, and be a bit more reasonable with everything, pretty much not being like fully focusing on persuasion, but at the same time not fully focusing on the technical stuff either, and try to balance the two of them. And I think your explanation makes sense as to why it came about, because that is the major change that has happened, right? Like in the past few years, that is the major change. The online era is the major change that has happened in debating, and that can definitely affect it to that extent. What I will say, however, is given that one of my, like, I do a lot of 3v3 debating as well, Ostro 3v whatever, um that doesn't change it a lot, in the sense that obviously there is a persuasion element, especially in reply speeches, whip speeches, but 3v3 as a format generally leads to cleaner debates anyways. Like, you have to beat the other team. There's no other option. There's no other way of looking at that. And it is obviously divorced from a lot of the technicalities that are inherent to the BP format of debating. So yeah, I think I agree with you, but I also think that the way forward is not overpowering persuasion again, but having a bit of a balance.
Where do you stand on the debate of plausibility versus, let's say, you can pretty much prove anything if you provide logical reasons behind it? I think there has been a clash, especially in the past few months, some like doom trends and stuff like that. And essentially, one side says, look, if it doesn't pass the gut check, if it sounds like it's something super unrealistic, even if you provide 10 reasons for it and it's very logical and structured, I'm not crediting it, as opposed to something that just kind of makes sense in the real world. Where do you stand on that debate? Do you think there is a problem with one side or the other?
I think it genuinely depends on, and this is where I think the 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 onus of this lies on the edge core in phrasing the motion in the debate that they want to happen. You can phase a motion by saying assuming feasibility and then writing the motion, which makes feasibility a bit of a non-factor, not entirely, but you can obviously run efficacy arguments, but makes feasibility somewhat of a non-factor. You can run in a hypothetical world, this, and then run the debate in that sense. Because other than that, you cannot have hypothetical debates as well. So I do think that you should be able to give logical reasons behind that. At the same time, however, if you are debating in a very sort of contemporary this house would policy motion, and someone says, wait a minute, that sounds super unrealistic, here's one illustration, intuition pump, example, whatever it is, yeah, I would credit that over 8 structural reasons, if that is what is the need of the motion at that point in time, and that is the way in which the debate was happening. Because at the end of the day, different motion types like require different styles of debating. And if you want to have a more meta, reasoning based, logic based debating, I think it's on the onus is on the edge core to phrase it in that way, and not like allowing the trap of, oh, this house would debate, because obviously these are two are very different. Assuming feasibility and then this house would, and then just a this house would, there's differences between the two. So the phrasing of the debate changes that everything pretty much. For me, I know this is a bit of a non-answer, because honestly, how do you pick that side? It's very difficult to pick that side, because you do want to have those logical, doesn't make any sense debates sometimes. You're like, oh, let's just discuss about the philosophical aspects of it and not like the real life aspects of it. Yeah, go for it. Like, if you want to talk about the philosophy of, say, veganism, um, that becomes quite a debate. But at the end of the day, also, if you want to talk about, like, trying to curb meat consumption through an effective policy, at that point in time, you have to bring the debate back to the real world, talk about like, things like backlashes that happen. Because sometimes it seems like, if they, like, for example, in a debate about, say, we are supporting like more vegan friendly policies, whatever way it is, the prop will have a philosophical leg up. Like, honestly, I don't know a good philosophical sort of argument against veganism per se, especially a persuasive one. Maybe there is one based on culture or whatever, but it's very difficult given the climate of debating overall and given the values and priorities of people at the moment. In those cases, if you're not allowing the other side, whatever the other side is, to run efficacy debates and trying to compare the two, how are you going to have that debate? And at that point in time, it's up to you to persuade the judge that no, this is the more important part as opposed to philosophical. But if the judge believes, you know what, this is so principally justified that I don't care if the efficacy like goes awry, it's fine, let's implement it anyways regardless of the pragmatic outcomes, then yeah, then you've won the debate. But if the other side is like, you know what, the efficacy is the most important thing, then yeah, let's just let people prove things as opposed to trying to take a side and look at what the motion is demanding and trying to put yourself in that particular position, because it is very difficult to say, oh, I prefer this over the other. Sometimes I prefer one over the other. It's just, yeah, it's just a the debate by debate thing.
So some would say your answer just now is a cop out, but I actually believe that it's a great observation in addition to the conversation, because it actually matters a lot what debates and situations we're talking about. You're 100% right. We don't want one over the other. We want them both to stay. And I think the frustrations of people mostly come in the situations where um, these these overly not plausible arguments that are so random have come in an international relations debate that actually has like a lot of complexity to it, and people are trying to claim that countries are going to invade each other or they're going to stop trade and things like that, versus the more philosophical argument. So I think as long as we are able to say, look, in these situations, just like, I'm not gonna buy this you proving World War III is gonna happen, and that's just how things are. So if we are able to draw from these frustrations but still keep the structural reasons, I think this is good. I think a hot take I would have is um, actually the average judge is pretty bad at following the structural reasons and the logic of complicated arguments. If they have like a huge strain of logic, and in order for them to work, they have to work with the framing and the responses from the other team and things like that. They're actually judges are pretty bad at that, and I don't think it's a wrong thing to say. Like we shouldn't expect that much of like people listening to you and making sense of a very complicated debate. But if you realize that, the only problem and thing that I want to call out people for is, since you are now part of this community and you're watching debates, when you start judging, I want you to forget everything that you've done so far. And when you see 10 structural reasons, don't just preemptively say, oh, this team has 10 structural reasons, they've got to be winning, but actually think about what are these reasons about it. Because I think a huge part of the frustration against this structural reasons movement, it lies exactly in the fact that people overuse it, and they make these buzzwords, this commentary, something that you've mentioned of like, oh, we have structural reasons, oh, we have framing. What is framing to you? Do you have actual framing? What did you actually say? Focus on that. And this is something that I'm very adamant about with kids when I'm coaching them or when I'm just giving them advice. Don't use these words unless you 100% know what they mean. And even in these cases, don't call it framing. Just say, here's the reasons that we give that prove to you why this doesn't matter or is less impactful. Just actually say what the thing is. Don't use the buzzwords. And when you understand why these buzzwords exist in the first place, how they came to be, then you can use them. And I didn't think about it this way, but I guess it is like advanced stuff. Like you really shouldn't be thinking about framing that much unless you can make arguments and you've debated a few motions, um, for that kind of sense. Um, I
Yeah,
guess you
no,
can.
just like on that, just very small, which is essentially if every time a team that gave more structural reasons won, then I don't think Niki would have made a Worlds final. I don't think I would have made it as far as we did. Because I will literally tell you this. Compared to EPL debaters, when you're writing and if you're tracking the entire thing, if Niki and I were speaking, you'd probably fill up, if say the EPL speaker is like 100% of your page, it would probably go up to 60%, 70%. I don't know, something around that line. And if that is true, if saying more things means that you win, then we lose every time, right? That is a bit of a ESL thing as well. Like we have to kind of sharpen our senses of whether it be framing, whether it be having strategic elements to our case that beats out using 2 reasons, we beat out 5 reasons. If we don't have those things, and if we are not able to persuade through those things, if 5 reasons beat 2 reasons all the time, then where do successful ESL debaters come through? How do they break it through? That becomes a big question at that point as well.
But also like the debates themselves, I think would be rather shit. Because sometimes it's great that you can beat the whole case in 2 sentences because you know that case was pretty bad and they were talking a bunch of bullshit. So might as well not drag on about it and talk about smarter stuff. It happens. Even if you're the best team in the world, if the team that did a PhD on this topic can completely destroy your arguments, logically sound arguments with some facts, with how things actually work. It is what it is. You take your losses and you go ahead. So let's leave it at there. I think we've definitely unpacked that a lot. My last conversation that I always have with people, and it's my last question to you. Um, who is the greatest of all time?
Oh, well, that is quite the, again, I think as someone who has said that it's very difficult to figure out who the greatest of all time is. um it's very difficult to figure that out, right? Like I would give 2 honorable mentions before I talk about my personal preference. 2 honorable mentions would be, one would be Eleanor Jones from Chennai Worlds, who broke through 26 points, best figure in the world. That was definitely probably the best performance ever in a preliminary setting, like the 9 rounds of Worlds, probably. And they were also phenomenal throughout the knockouts. Um, the other honorable mention would be good friend David Africa, who's won so many trophies, and that obviously is massive. Like you've got people from different sports who've won so many things. They just know how to win, right? And it's one of those things about David. Actually, he knows how to win, and that is something that you've got to commend from that. Um, in terms of personal preference, it would be also slightly difficult for me to say who is the best speaker or like the best debater of all time. Um, if you asked me this 10 years ago, I would have, without a shadow of a doubt, said Viktor Frankl, because he was just my favorite, like easily. Just so persuasive, so amazing as a speaker. I think I consider like the "This House Would Invade Zimbabwe" Prime Minister speech was phenomenal, and even in the semis, I think ban organized religion speech from Viktor Frankl, phenomenal again. Like the ability to run those arguments that persuasively, ending the debate at PM, kind of in a Worlds final, was insane for that era. Um, Modern times, perhaps either. Hmm, that's difficult. Harish, Ashish would be the 2 names that I can think of. But it's a bit funny that both of their names are very similar and they're both brown boys. But uh, yeah, again, it's so incredibly difficult to say who the GOAT is, because the moment I say Harish and Ashish, right? And then I remember so many other people that probably should and would be in the part of the conversation. Like um, Vinu Goswami, for example, was absolutely phenomenal. Like like Vino Goswami during that era of test worlds, where a lot of people think that the debate actually shifted in or op whip, and probably in the modern era of, like, letting whips do more things, you would probably vote CO in that debate. A lot of people think that. I don't think it's a horrible take. I think it's one of the it's a very reasonable take to have. If you look at people who have gone through circumstances that were against them, you would talk about people like Yoni, who've like absolutely revolutionized what it means for ESL teams to achieve. Like, if you look at that, I think the 2009 Euros semi-finals, which I think is probably one of the funniest speeches of all time in that level of debating, like in that level of elite debating, you have one of the funniest speeches of all time, and I value that speech insanely highly, and like just redefining what being an ESL debater means. If you look at Helena and Siri making semis at Malaysia Worlds, absolutely unthinkable. Dan and Ayal again breaking barriers for ESL teams, breaking top, getting to 25 points, absolutely insane. If you look at Jasmine and Mif breaking second for Asia, which was unthinkable for the Asian circuit at the time. So and the reason I'm saying all of these names, you can count like my answer as like Harish or Ashish, and that's fine. But the reason I'm saying all of these names is because they have gone through adversities and barriers that have impacted, like, me as a debater, but also a lot of debaters across the world, that should count for a lot, right? If you look at, like, 2015 worlds, where you still have ESL bias, you still have sexism. Someone like Helena breaking 41, not even having that tag of, oh, we broke high and therefore we have face value. Not even that. And then going, and as you said, Siri was also a phenomenal debater, and both of them going all the way to semis is incredible, like absolutely incredible for that era. And then me going up to my first worlds in Mexico and seeing Dan and I'll be like there can be EPL teams that run 10 structural reasons, doesn't matter, we're still the best. That obviously had an impact. And like from my personal perspective, like if you think about, like, say me talking about it as a Bangladeshi, like looking at Mubarak being a Bangladeshi, having that Bangladeshi accent, and still be like, still winning Australs, still breaking at worlds continuously and consistently, being one of the most consistent debaters that I've ever seen, modeling a lot of my speech around Mubarak, like obviously would get a shout out as well. And as I said, from Asia as well, if you look at Amira, Jasmine, who've been quite incredible. Amira also being an ESL woman, breaking through and, like, winning Australs, continuously doing well at Worlds, was quite amazing. So actually, genuinely, it's very difficult. Like, if you want a more controversial take from me, I could give it to you, or not in terms of GOAT, because as I said, it's very difficult to determine who the GOAT is. But like, the reason I actually say Harish is because I've seen Harish's making cases, just like generally, Harish, what is the case? And the level through which the detailing that Harish can come up with, like present day, even like 2-3 years ago, was insane, absolutely insane. Like, yeah, I don't think I have okay, genuinely speaking, I don't think I've ever feared speaking after a debater, ever. That was once, Octos, Mexico, Dan. And I think if I ever go up against Harish, that might be one of those moments. So that's why, like, oh, also, yeah, obviously Dan is a shout out for sure, in that sense. So, oh my god, I've said so many names, but uh, it's very difficult to come up with a name, for that matter. But yeah, like, special shout out Eleanor Jones. Trophy goat is D'Africa. Uh, Personal childhood favorite quote would be Victor Finkel. And currently speaking, probably from, like, at least, and at the end of the day, you have to look at Harish and see that, like, the number of years that Harish has been involved in debating as well kind of also shows, like, every now and then when Harish comes back to Worlds and still judges, and the ability to remain relevant across eras is also very, very difficult. Like, whether or not Harish is debating in LAC Open now or before. And I think the same with Ashish, right? If you look at the round robin performances, he's doing phenomenal. So, like, across eras, these two have been quite amazing. So yeah, long answer, but that is it.
No, I think the biggest takeaway is, if you are a younger debater and you're hearing these names for the first time, pick a few, go check them out, get inspired. Uh, don't try to analyze every speech of Harish and be like Harish, rather than just like see a few debates, get inspired, see what debating can be, what debating was, what debating is right now, and try to figure out your own way of doing it, so that we can keep this game fresh, we can keep it interesting, and we get we are such a diverse community, and I hate for that diversity to not be represented in the approaches and thought processes and ideas, and just in identity, in that sense. I think we have the identity part, and I want to see it flourish in the ideas department, because these things are connected and the perspectives are important. So hopefully you use your identity to become another version of debating. I don't know, that's probably a lot of blah blah, but
Yeah,
it's food for thought.
it
Look,
is.
I think this has been a very inspiring conversation. I do want to give you the ball. Um, like, this is a platform that exists out there. It goes to a lot of debaters some way or another, especially now with the shorts. Even the Gen Zers are looking over. So, is there anything you want to say to the community, or a topic that is important to you and you want to get out there so people can think about it?
Wait, aren't you Gen Z?
What's no, I'm not Gen Z. I'm 98. I'm definitely not Gen
Yeah,
Z.
no, that is Gen Z.
Is it Gen Z? What's the
Yeah,
definition of Gen Z?
yep. 97 onwards. I'm 96, so.
Oh man.
Anyways, I genuinely think in terms of messages, I think the things that I said with regards to commentary and all of that, I think one of the things that I really want to say is, I think us as a community, and I think I have tried to do this all my debating career. Hopefully, I have not transgressed from it. If I have, then um, apologies to whoever that I've done. But I think just be like, being nice is something that I think is sometimes you know overlooked in debating, in the sense that absolutely, by the way, criticize and make fun of a case all you want, like, but stay in that line, don't cross that line and go into that person, right? That would be something that I would say initially. But also, like, whatever that happens in the debate, after the debate, be quite cordial, be as polite as you can, talk to people. Oftentimes there are people who are being inspired by you in that debate. Be nice to them as much as you can, help out as many people as you can going forward. I absolutely applaud Niki that you're doing a podcast, which is a way of giving back, because at the end of the day, like, different people that have come to this podcast will have different things, and even if there's 10 minutes that you take away from each podcast that you like, I've learned something new about debating, that's still a lot that you are um doing for that community. I think as a community, just be as nice as you can, help out people. Very, very, very tacky nice things that you can do, but these things do matter. Like, some of the things that I remember the most is actually like from coaching people, and like them coming up to me and saying, like, you have completely transformed the way I look at debating, and stuff like that has been absolutely, like, absolutely some of my favorite moments in debating. So yeah, at the end of the day, you take away those things. Obviously you take away the trophies as well, but you take away those things from you in debating. Those are the things that you will remember the most. Like for example, even I in this podcast, I was just like, Mexico Octos, Dan came up to us and said our rebuttals were good. Like you can see the fanboy coming through. And for Dan, it didn't really, for him, it wasn't a big deal. Like, it didn't cost him anything. But a kid came up to him and asked, hey, did you please see? And he chose to look at the good part of their speech and chose to highlight that. And that inspired two kids to then go on and do bigger things. And that those things happen, and those things happen unbeknownst to you sometimes. So do as much good as you can, I suppose. Yeah.
Very, very altruistic. I like it. I like it on a positive note. Before I leave you, you said that you watched some of the episodes. Do you have a favorite moment from one of the episodes that maybe you can, as a last note, get people to go watch that one as well?
Oh, um I actually quite liked Ayal's episode. I thought it was quite insightful. When I was listening to it, I was like, because like honestly, Ayal is also from like my favorite era of debating, like the 1819 kind of zone, 1819 20, that era of debating. Genuinely my favorite. That's definitely something um, that I would recommend in terms of the episodes, if I remember correctly. And I would also say that, like, I know that the recent episode from I'm not sure if it's published yet with Ashish, um, but I know what Ashish has talked about, because the sort of questions you ask Ashish in the podcast, I have probably had those conversations with him. So even if I've not listened to that podcast, I know what is there. Those are some very good takes in there. So, like, Ashish's episode, definitely um, have a have a have a look. Yeah,
Great stuff. Thank you for your time, and see you sometime in the future.
yeah. See you hopefully some point.